Welcome to the Evolving Leadership Development Podcast. Each episode brings you fresh perspectives from thinkers and practitioners who are redefining leadership in the age of AI.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Evolving Leadership Development Podcast. I am your host, Panos Malakoudis, and this episode today I have with me Claire Venetsanakou. Now, Claire is a good friend of mine, and Claire is a professional coach that helps leaders and executives become more aware of what they need to change to become better human leaders, and to also help their organization and their teams thrive. So welcome to the podcast, Claire. Very lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Panos. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you and with everyone.
So, Claire, we've been working together for a few years now, and recently we got to talk about AI and about your work with leaders. And you mentioned something that I hadn't heard for a few years, to be honest. But I remember when I first heard that term, I said, "Wow, that is really interesting. I want to know more." And that was polarities, and the work that you do with polarities, and what is a polarity, and where do these polarities show up in your work with all these leaders and these executives. So why don't we start by you telling me what is the work that you do with leaders and executives, and what are polarities?
Okay. Thank you for asking. And yes, polarities, it is something that I really like and enjoy doing. I'm noticing that leaders, managers, but especially leaders and corporates, they're navigating in many different tensions. We say a lot about complexities. We say a lot about the challenges that we're having. And even after COVID, always was like that, I think. But after COVID and all these changes that we experienced, now more and more, and the war and AI and everything, it's too complicated, too complex, and needs to not to be resolved, because sometimes problems and difficulties, they're not to be resolved, but they are to be managed. I was experiencing this and sensing and seeing how many different things I need to take under control. And then I came to know also about the polarity, which is not something I discovered, but Barry Johnson talked about this many, many years ago. I think it was about 1976, who introduced this term, and also the polarity map. And I got really curious about this. And I said, okay, polarity. What is it about the polarity? And what is the strength of, instead of resolving problems, managing? And so that's what I got curious. And then I did also a workshop for a leadership team in an organization. And we took actually the real polarities they were about, like global and local, because nowadays we need to work now in a local space, but at the same time in a global space, about control or being flexible. And even managers sometimes, no, they need to navigate between two things: how to help my people to perform, so be oriented towards solutions and tasks, but at the same time, how to see that relationship side, now to build up and focus on the relationship. So what am I to do? Am I going to focus to one side to resolve things, or I need to handle both of them? Because it is interdependent. We need both. So polarity is about holding two truths at the same time and finding that sweet spots, or I think that it's similar with what Aristotle says about the golden mean. The golden mean, to not overuse one side or overdo the other side. And so mostly, I got passionate about this polarity, and every time, everything I see, even in my coaching sessions or my training sessions, actually what I'm noticing is this capacity. If we see things under the polarities and how to integrate, then things can come more easily.
That is so true. I love what you just said, which says it is basically a new way to look at things, a new way to interpret things, right? I'll open a parenthesis here. This wouldn't be two Greeks having a podcast if we didn't mention Aristotle. We have to, right? So it would be a disgrace if we didn't do that.
Thank you for saying that.
We had to. Socrates comes next, and Plato. But it is a new way. It is a different way of seeing things. And the moment you turn that engine on, you cannot turn it off. All of a sudden, you start saying, well, what if it's not a polarity? And that was my understanding, that the polarity is artificial. It's not real. It is in a way a cognitive bias where we are presented with what we perceive to be two opposites, global or local, like you said, right? And we say, well, I can either do this or I can do that. I cannot do both. And we create these polar opposites, thus polarity. We create these polar opposites in our head. And then a coach comes in, or we kind of self-coach because we understand our cognitive biases, and says, well, what if it's not? What if it's not a polarity? And you mentioned something that came up also in the previous podcast episode we had with 𝐯𝐢𝐝𝐞𝐬. And you said, I wrote it down, you said, problems do not necessarily need to be resolved. They need to be managed. And Jordi said almost something very similar, which he said, problems do not need to be resolved. They need to be understood. And I think it's the middle ground between, instead of resolving the problems, understand the problem so that you can manage it eventually.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
What are some of the most common polarities that, without sharing sensitive information, what are some of the common polarities that come up for leaders these days?
I see a lot the stability from one side and the change from the other side. The global and local that I said, which is something really common. The manager's side, as I said, I was reflecting on that because I was doing a situational leadership training. And we were dealing exactly to the same thing. No, okay, we need to take care of the task, the people, the performing, but at the same time being able to manage people. So again, even if we don't need to navigate huge complexity, even in the manager role, these polarities are there. It's reality. So we cannot see only one side from the other. Exactly, the polarities, the characteristic of one thing to say is not about choosing one or another, one or the other, but it's the both and. So that shifting perspective, how from both of them, and we need one and the other at the same time. Innovation, and the conditional, the more standard things, the standardize, how to be standard, but at the same time to innovate. So again, the change and maybe the control, the stability, centralization or decentralization can be another one. With here you can see maybe also terms like control, what we need to control and what we need to give autonomy to the other side. So those are some polarities that I'm noticing. And of
these
course,
are all, they're nothing new, right? So many of them have been around for decades and decades. Innovation versus control, innovation versus operationalization, innovation versus profit. And you said, what if it's not one or the other? What if it's one and the other? Is there another interpretation or another reaction to the polarity similar to how we deal with the situations where you have a conflict? I was reading somewhere that the way that the brain tries to resolve a conflict, first of all, the brain tries to resolve a conflict. So this is really, really great. And it's a powerful tool for coaches to expose the conflict, because then your client tries to resolve it, right? But it was also saying that a really marvelous conflict resolution approach is when we say, well, what if it's not a conflict of choosing between A or B? What if a better option C exists? Is that also within the scope of polarities, how you help your clients, where you tell them, well, you have created this artificial split in your mind of, global or local. And one option is, what if it's both? And another option is, what if there's another option? What is the better solution? Is that also coming up in your conversations?
In some extent, yes. So sometimes it can be the integrated phase, no? So what's in the middle? What's if we take the one side and the other side, because we need them both, so to create a third way, no, a different way, a transformative way. It's not a solution, it's an approach. It's, as you said before, it's a new perspective of seeing things. There is a process when you are using the polarity to find what is in the middle, what we need to take under consideration. As we said, it's about the two polarities. Per se, it creates a tension. So it's about how I can be able to handle this tension. So it's about the interdependency of those two. In dealing with this interdependency, it means that we need something to think in a third way, the good things from the one side, the good thing from the other side, but at the same time, we need to consider what if we have the overuse of one, and what if there is the overuse of the other. So it's about a mental process of, yes, we want to have an integrated solution, but it's a process that brings you to find that way of being the more suitable, of being the more fruitful for the situation for me to handle. Because imagine if we speaking in the global or local, it's about finding really that in third way, which really help us having connect both of them. So the process is about mapping it. And not only, there are also some other ways, because this what if really exists, as you said. What if I take the benefit of one, and what if I take the benefit of the other? Okay. And then let me see also what is the downside if I take this one or the other side. So it's about, I don't know if it's about how similar with the conflict that you were saying. It looks like yes, but I'm not so
There
sure.
are some commonalities. Yeah, there are some
Yeah.
commonalities. And I think you make the distinction very clear in that it is more of a way of thinking. It is more of an approach of where you just say, it's not one or the other, right? If it's not one or the other, if I take off that assumption, what is possible? And I think this is where I'm getting to is on the what is possible front, there are options, right? You can either find the golden mean by combining these things. And in the process, you might even find that there was no polarity to begin with, and there's a better third choice or a fourth choice, or there are a number of choices that manifest themselves simply because you are not looking at this from a polarity lens. It is a mindset shift. But the moment you achieve that mindset shift, all of a sudden, more opportunities are possible. Now, enter artificial intelligence and all the disruption, both good and bad, that artificial intelligence is introducing. Now, similar to you, I've worked with leaders as well, and I see conflict and confusion, and I do see polarities. Have you had conversations so far with some leaders, and do you see these polarities surface in these conversations around AI and about how can they use it? Is it the future? What is their risk?
Mm-hmm. To tell you the truth, I was seeing more polarities at the beginning when they started talking about AI. So is it good or bad? Is it conflictual or not? Is it going to replace human side or not? How we are going? So it was more black or white. Now I'm seeing that it's that gray area, which gray not in a negative manner, but a gray which combines the two things. And actually, I treat it also like polarity. It's not about one or the other. It's about how we can be really, really able to handle, to manage the tension between not to overuse technology and AI, and not to say we are human, you're not going to, you don't use it, you don't need it, no? So it's about maintaining that interdependency and see how can I take the best and see AI as a really tool to my end to serve the society, to serve the corporation, to serve my team, to serve everything. And at the same time, how to use the core, the benefits of us being human and see AI as a way where we can improve, where we can be helped by, where we can simplify some things. So again, see the positive manner of it and embrace those things. So absolutely, I see the polarity here again, and maintaining this interdependency because we need both. And at the same time, maintain this ethical part, not to overuse AI.
It's interesting what you said in the beginning. Well, the whole thing was interesting, but in the beginning, you said something that kind of stayed with me. You said I saw more polarities in the beginning, which was in a way a more primitive reaction, which was, is it good or bad? It wasn't very nuanced in the beginning. Is it good or bad? AI, good or bad? What is my opinion? And as people go through the increased understanding of what AI can potentially offer, what are the potential opportunities, the polarities are still there, but they're slightly different. It could be a polarity between, do we activate AI in that front and increase our efficiency, or do we let people go because we achieve that? Is that the polarity? Is that the decision we need to make? Invest in AI and let people go. That is a potential polarity that's coming up quite often, right? Or is it having AI making more of the decisions? And on the other side, well, am I devaluing my role as a leader? And then it is the ethical part that comes in. And I was reading an article this morning. Apparently, the person of the year cover at Time magazine just came out, and they have the 7 most influential people on AI, from kind of the grandmother of AI to Elon Musk and some of the other, big tech influencers. And there was a question by one of the people that posted that picture online, and that person said, do you have on your board, on your decision circle, do you have 7 people shouting about the value of AI and just one person in the corner asking the question, yes, but should we? So what is the balance of the voices that you have in your head? And you're just making me revisit the purpose of this podcast, which is to introduce these voices like you that says, well, hold on, yes, we can do it. Is that the ethical thing to do? And is it even beyond ethics? Because the ethics is in a way the how. Is it the responsible thing to do? Is it, they call it ethical AI, but I see the term responsible AI being used a lot more, and I love it. Is it the responsible thing to do? If we introduce this, are we creating other negative side effects? And are we knowingly doing this? And this is kind of where the ethics are coming in. Are we knowingly being irresponsible, or are we being irresponsible accidentally?
Absolutely. You know what? It resonates a lot with me, this responsible AI that you're saying. And I love it too, because actually it gives me the third way of the polarity. It's not about the one or the other. It's about having a responsible AI, which is the integration of the two polarities. And I will tell you more. Why it came into my mind what you're saying, responsible AI. It looks like it is an ongoing process, inquiring ourselves. It's not about finding the sweet argument of being responsible or having a responsible attitude towards AI. It's about ongoing questioning ourselves from time to time. Are we still in this responsible AI attitude we want to be or not? So am I derailing from what I decided or we decided to be as an organization, as leaders, as functions, and so on? And so that gives, again, this sense of it's not one stand all. Again, choosing. Or even if I choose to integrate and to hold the interdependence, it's not that it's there. I need to follow up and I need to question myself. Am I direct or not? Am I still in this side or not? Am I following the action plans we agreed we want or not? Or even something else? Because we all have preferences, right? Maybe I will be more preferent on my vulnerability towards the human side or toward the AI side. How my vulnerability or my preference is showing up in my decision to stay on that responsible AI. So that's why I'm saying it is a process. And it's not something that I created. I had the privilege to listen a webinar many years ago, I think before the pandemic. And then I read also their book about navigating polarities, Brian Emerson and Kelly Lewis. And they created this mapping of polarity where describing exactly that. Benefits, overuses. But pay attention also to the vulnerabilities, the signals that it's telling you, you are getting away from the integrated part. And I love it because that gives me the sense when you said the responsible AI. What do you think?
Well, I think that is the crux of what we discussed here. So you're basically saying that when it comes to AI, looking at the polarity through a lens of ethics and responsibility can be a method of integrating the polarities for a more sustainable future. Beyond being aware of just and I wrote it down, your vulnerabilities and your preferences, which is just another word of biases, right?
Of course.
How your vulnerabilities and your preferences are showing up as a bias in the process of thinking about this. But I love it. I love it because that then becomes a northern star. It becomes a framework for people to say, when I feel this tension, when I feel that I'm dealing with a vulnerability, what is the responsible and ethical thing to do? And I usually in this podcast episodes, one of the last questions I'm asking is always, if there's one thing that you could propose to the leaders, to the HR departments, if they didn't have a coach next to them, to ask themselves, what would that be? And it sounds like that would be a great thing for them to reflect on, right? If you didn't have a Claire, if you didn't have a Panos next to you, asking you those questions, at least ask yourself, when you're faced with a polarity, what is the responsible and ethical thing to do here?
Exactly. And I totally agree. And that's also my favorite question, because when you're noticing your preference, then it's about seeing what's there and where you need to go. So what is my preferred mode or my vulnerability actually gives me the opportunity to pay attention objectively. And the second thing, when we're dealing in between, to look the interdependency and not with the attitude to solve the tension. When there is a tension, there's no need to try to solve it, but how to look it with the lens of the interdependency and not as a problem to be solved. So that's where the two questions I see for the people that they can be helpful.
And that's why 𝐯𝐢𝐻 in the previous podcast episode, when he was talking about systemic coaching, that's where he saw the interconnection with polarities. Don't automatically try to solve the problem. Try to understand it so that you can manage it, like you said, but also understand the system that the problem exists in. What are the loyalties between the systems? Something that I really love about systemic coaching and the constellations approach is the photo they have on the cover of the book, which is a photo of a peacock with its tail open and all the little eyes on the tail of a peacock, because it says we're all a peacock and we carry all these systems and identities with us. So if you're a leader, if you're an executive, and you feel either pressured or you feel the opportunity of introducing AI in the organization, and you start to see these tensions and you start to observe these polarities, account for the systemic approach, account for all the interconnections between the systems and say, well, how is this affected? If there's a tension in my team and my team is reacting, or my company, my organization is reacting to the implementation of AI, do I just isolate it as a problem and say this is a problem to be fixed? Or do I need to look at the system and say, well, where is this coming from? Is there a different part of the organization that is affecting how this part of the organization is feeling? Right? Do I need to work with HR? Do I need to work with industry leaders to make some changes? It also goes back into the adaptive leadership, which is, I absolutely adore adaptive leadership, because it also says not every problem is a technical problem, in terms of a technical problem can be solved, an adaptive problem, not really, not necessarily. So in the adaptive leadership approach, it is really, again, about understanding the system, understanding the maturity of the problem and the maturity of the system to understand the problem. And I do think as we go deeper into how do we need to help leaders and executives develop in this new age of AI, it's not necessarily new things that they need to study. It might be, when did you say that, polarities were first introduced in the 60s? You said, I don't remember what you said.
When the first polarity thinking was about, I think it was 1975.
In the 70s, mid-70s, exactly, right? So it's still valid. It's still valuable, that information. Adaptive leadership, situational leadership you mentioned, polarities, systemic leadership. These are all methodologies and frameworks of interpretation and of leadership and of understanding the world that we just need to put in this new context.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And as you were referring to the systemic approach, actually what I'm realizing is that the polarity itself, it is a system.
Yes.
When we're dealing with work and life balance, now well-being, that it's also very, very likely, and they're saying they're talking a lot about well-being and work-life balance. It is a system. global, local. It is a system. So what if we look at this lens of being systemic, then it's not transactional. It is totally systemic, where systemic also needs this approach of finding action plans to deal the tension, but at the same time, revisiting, looking at it again. It's more transformational. It's more adaptive, as you said. It's regenerative, as if. It's about also making us and leaders in organization and HR people to stop for a minute and think and see what's going on. It's not A and B and that's it, the solution. It's A that produces something and B that produces something which is C, and that C needs to be taken care of. So being monitored, being seen, taking ourselves in considerations, not to fall in our preferences and so on. So I see this in a very cyclical way also, as you were mentioning. So it is a system for sure.
That is beautiful. And it's a good point to wrap it up for today. I think it's a perfect point for us to conclude this conversation. Claire, thank you so much for joining the episode today. For people that want to know more about you, where do they find you? Online, on LinkedIn?
They can find me on LinkedIn for sure, Claire Venetsanakou, as my name and surname. And thank you so much for having me. And it was really, really beautiful to see you and to discuss about polarity and the trends of the leadership.
For me as well. And all the resources, the link to your LinkedIn profile, a couple of books that you mentioned, we will all put it in the description and people will find it over there. Thanks again for joining. And to everybody listening, thanks for joining this episode. And we'll see you next time.